Welcome to Now and Next in Public Affairs, brought to you by Helio Intelligence, the home of de Havilland and Forefront. We are here, of course, to discuss the future of public affairs with myself, Jack Talbot, and today I'm joined by Ali Plummer, who is the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Wildlife and Countryside Link. Ali, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me.
Not at all. Before we get into the meat and drink of the future of the profession, we of course need to have a bit of a think about how it's evolved. In terms of yourself, you've over 15 years experience working in public affairs here in the UK. You've worked at the Wildlife Trust, the RSPB, and of course your new position at the Wildlife and Countryside Link. How's it been? How's things evolved?
It's been good. As you say, I've been working for about 15 years in policy and in public affairs. And when I first started, I was thinking about this the other day. We would still hand stuff envelopes to invite MPs to events, for example. So engagement was much, much more time consuming. We printed an awful lot. We would hard copy everything, and we spent quite a lot on postage. I spent quite a lot of my formative years franking. I think, I was sort of reflecting what are the sort of key things that have changed. One is technology. Parliament is more accessible than it has ever been. It's really easy to contact an MP, to contact a peer. And that's not just true for me and kind of people working in public affairs professionally, anyone can do it. So that's sped up the ability to kind of contact MPs, to get invites out, to get briefings into the hands of parliamentarians when they're considering your policy areas. But I think the sort of counter to that is they've got inboxes that are absolutely stuffed full of everyone else doing the exact same thing. So it's a much more kind of accessible place, but I think the noise of kind of constituents and of campaigners and of public and kind of private interest groups contacting Parliament means cut through is much more challenging. If you think about the advent of things like 38 Degrees and e-campaigning, again, for my role, I work for charities that do a lot of work campaigning on environmental issues. So again, it's a great way to mobilise large numbers of people, but it's a great way to mobilise large numbers of people on lots and lots of different issues. So again, getting cut through, getting your issues into the inbox, into the hands of an MP and getting them to sort of see it can be a bit harder. I think there was a period of time where e-campaigning, digital campaigning was at its height. It was a really exciting time. I think it sort of feels now that it's really saturated the market. So that's made things quite challenging. And then I guess, probably one of the other big things in particular over the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years is that politics generally has become really polarised. It's become quite adversarial. Nuance is sort of getting lost in the way that we talk about things. In the media, I think, can often, when we're approaching issues, people are kind of looking for you think that, so what's the opposing view? So often nuance can be lost. It can be a much more kind of conflict heavy space. There's a lot of accusations of wokeness being brought into the sorts of issues that we can be talking about. And I think issues often get conflated as well. So it's not enough anymore to sort of have a view on an issue. It's often then snowballs into, we need to have a view on all these other issues as well. So yeah, it can make it sort of more challenging space, I think, to work, because in particular in the environment, you're reliant on kind of two key things. One is it's a very long-term game. You need cross-party consensus. You need actions that will take place over decades, if not centuries. And so you really need politicians of all sides to come together. So the adversarial nature makes that really challenging, because often you'll get an environmentally savvy party, and then almost the thing to do is then, if you're in opposition, to take an opposing view, just to take an opposing view. So that makes it quite challenging. And also the issues are complex. They're, ecological systems we're talking about. There's a high level of interconnectivity with lots of different policy areas. And that means it's not really black and white. It's quite hard to take a really simple view and to explain it really simply. And it is often shades of green. And so that I think can make it really challenging in a world where people don't necessarily want to read a briefing anymore. They'd like to read it in a tweet. And then I guess the final thing I'd say is it's really great. There's this great connectivity. I think, as I say, it's never been easier almost to contact Parliament. But it also means that you are required to have an opinion on things almost immediately because of social media and the advent of, it's almost a sort of 24-hour plus news cycle. people can contact you like immediately because they want to get your thoughts out on a new government proposal or a piece of legislation. So there's not a lot of time sometimes to think before you have to put your response out. And also, when you do put your response out, you're accessible. Everyone can have an opinion on what you're saying, which leans into that adversarial nature. Because previously, when I first started, if people didn't like what you were doing, they'd write to you, or I guess they'd email you. Whereas now, anyone can tweet at you, or is that the right term anymore? Can X at you? I don't know what the phrase is. Or, they can use social media to just have an opinion like really quickly. And again, in a short, sharp response and that nuance and that kind of maybe more thoughtful discussion can kind of slightly get lost in and amongst this sort of fury of social media and sort of immediacy of responses. So mixed bag, I guess.
Very mixed. Listening to you is really interesting. There's quite a lot to unpack there. Is it too simple for me to say that it sounds like making good policy is harder than it was?
I'm going to do that like classic Fence City thing. It isn't that black and white, probably, in that I think it can be harder to appear thoughtful, but it's easier to get a broader and more diverse range of views, and that should always lead to better policy making. It's a larger group of people, a larger range of stakeholders, a more diverse range of voices, and in particular in public policy, that's incredibly important. I mean, Westminster can feel like an incredibly intimidating place, I think, to access. It's almost, feels like it's been designed to be quite intimidating or fairly inaccessible, strangely, for the sort of seat of democracy. So I think the more opportunity there is to build a broad range of voices into policymaking is better. But I think the flip side of that is it can be hard to incorporate all those voices and to make thoughtful policy, because everyone will have an opinion on it. And sometimes if the government's changed their minds, they're classified as having taken a U-turn, and it becomes this sort of like big deal. Whereas actually, my view is politicians taking soundings, thinking about policy, understanding it a bit more, and then changing their mind when they've got better evidence is at the heart of good decision making. So I don't think that the immediacy and the sort of the noise of social media necessarily instills confidence in decision makers to do that. I think sometimes it can hold people back from taking really bold or innovative decisions, but I do think it does allow folks to tap into a broader range of voices, which, as I say, should always lead to better decision making, because it's more representative and it's more thoughtful on a broader impact.
Listening to you, a couple of things sprung to mind. I don't know if you've read it, but I read Sam Friedman's book she released a couple of years ago. I think it's something along the line of Why Nothing Works and How We Fix It. And there are a couple of things that, from memory, that I took away from the book are things I believe you've raised, maybe not in the exact same language, but definitely the adversarial kind of nature and landscape of the political system, and also the pace of things. And I think when you mix those things together, it's almost like the government of the day has to deal with kind of the politics of everything and the speed of everything and the grid, I guess, and the media. But also the objective ultimately is to put good policy through the process. So I think that's really interesting. Do you have a view on how that might progress over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how Labour, for example, have approached their first year, there's been like a high level of impatience. There can be this view that, there are big, again, take the issues that I work on, environmental issues. We're not going to solve them overnight. We're not going to solve them in a parliamentary term. We're not going to solve them in 5 years. We can put decision making in place which will set us on a path to nature's recovery, for example. But there is an impatience about results, and that will probably almost get worse. I certainly think the adversarial nature of politics, I fully expect it to be, in particular on some of the issues that I work on, climate change, net zero, some of the nature issues, to almost be at a peak, or maybe it might not peak, but I think it'll get kind of more adversarial, it'll get more pokey, everything will feel more polarised, and I don't see the mood music of that changing particularly. I also feel like probably the last sort of 5 years or more have seen an erosion of, this is not a massive revelation, an erosion of trust in central politics, in central government, in the public's sort of trust and cynicism around like what governments can do for you. And that really worries me, because I sort of think almost worse than a sort of adversarial or a strong view on something is apathy and an absolute disengagement with decision making and policy and politics. That worries me, because at its heart, I think democracy is probably at its strongest when you get a core group of people that feel really passionately and strongly about something, I'd like it to feel a bit less adversarial. I'd like it to be a bit more collaborative in coming forward with solutions. But that's, that wide range, as many voices as you can get, that's sort of democracy at its heart, right? And a sort of turning off of people from politics and voter apathy, low turnout, means that you're likely to see politics dominated by, a core group of very loud but a sort of small group of voices, and we'll lose that sort of broader benefit of a wide range of voices. And for me and the work that I do, I work and have worked for organisations that have large memberships. We sort of, it's part of the core tenet of, the work of the RSPB, of the Wildlife Trusts, that they've got these large memberships and, feel empowered to work for nature, but on behalf of people that really care about this. And I sort of worry if people sort of turn off engaging with politics and think that it's irrelevant or think that they can't make a difference. That feels like a real shame to me. And I would say that because I work in politics and think it's central and core to everything. But, certainly on the issues that I work at, it is. Like, we can't solve them unless we get a huge amount of public and political buy-in for a good number of years. So, yeah, I think things will get more adversarial. I think trust will, or engagement with politics might well continue to decline, other than maybe in some of these sort of shouty, digital, what are now the sort of public marketplaces. And I'm not sure what that will mean for policy making, but I think it'll be challenging.
Yeah, a disclaimer to all the listeners: me and Ali have very similar views on this, which we may or may not have discussed in the past. But I share a very similar view in the sense that I think over a period of time, whether you want to call it the last decade or arguably the last couple of decades, I think we have seen an erosion of trust and confidence in politics. Now, whether that's the politicians themselves, the political parties, the process that goes behind making policy, it's quite concerning because it leads to things that you've covered. It leads to disengagement. It leads to lower voter turnout. And I think the challenge for the profession is quite clear in that sense. There's all of these things going on. And one of the things I'm really interested in finding out from your perspective is a little bit about how the future looks for the stakeholders themselves, whether that's members of parliament, whether it's the civil service. I'm really interested in your sense of what does the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years look for those people? Because I think it's fair to say that most MPs now, compared to say 20 years ago, I'm not saying they've got more on their plate, because I think that's not necessarily accurate, but I think the world is different now, and the demands on these elected officials are different. And in some respects, I can understand why these elected officials look for quick wins and sound bites. I do understand it, but I'm really interested in understanding, I guess, what your take is on how these elected officials are going to operate in the next few years and what the profession is going to have to do to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point around, how MPs are working, how their constituency offices are working is well made. Like, I mean, certainly we hear that the casework, the inboxes of MPs have never been busier. And in part, I think that is because of, what I was saying before about the ability to sort of contact your MP just at the click of a button, and in particular campaigning stuff. But even just on kind of individual casework and caseloads, they're really high. I mean, one of the things that we've spent quite a lot of time thinking about is, I'm a big believer in the we do a lot of campaigning at a national level. And I think one of the things that is sort of missing in how we campaign is that connection to people and their local spaces and constituency level campaigning, making that connection between, what's being discussed at Westminster and why it matters to people at a local level is really important. And it's something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, is how can we tailor messages? How can we be much more tapped into people at a local level? So I guess to give an example, last week, led by the Climate Coalition and a range of other sort of mix of sort of faith organisations, climate organisations, community organisations, nature organisations. We held a mass lobby at Parliament where over 5,000 constituents came to Westminster, and we helped facilitate conversations between their MP and their constituents. And that, was the buzz around it was really affirming. I think constituents being able to connect with other constituents, to find people that share their concerns, but also share their passions, getting FaceTime with their MP so that you're able to talk about that, I think was really affirming. And we were able to sort of demonstrate that these national issues did have this very local connection. People travelled from, it was, I think, over 500 constituencies, across the UK to come and talk about, the issues that are really important. So takes some of the heat out of it a bit in a way, I think, as well. It's hard to argue that you're talking about a sort of niche or woke issue, for want of a better phrase, when, there are literally constituents in front of you that have travelled quite a long way to talk about it. They really care about it. It's harder to be dismissive about your issues. So I think you probably will see, certainly in our sector, people trying to connect and make the case at a local level a lot more. I think in part that's driven because it's just an important way to get your message across, but I think it'll be in part driven by a recognition that the sort of e-campaigning, digital campaigning is harder now, it's maybe less impactful now, it's quite hard to get cut through in the media, so we're having to think about like new innovative ways to connect people with their MPs. And actually, I think for a lot of people that maybe are turned off, it's funny, people say I don't like politics, or I don't want to engage with Westminster, but then you talk to them about their local area and their local green spaces, in the case of the stuff that I work on, or the green space that their kids have access to, or the places they walk their dogs. And suddenly they really do care about these things, and they do want to talk about them, and they feel really passionately about them. So for me, that will be a big focal point, is how can we try and be better at sort of tailoring our messages, our national messages, at a more constituency level, at a more local level. And also, I think, step slightly away from speaking on behalf of our membership or speaking on behalf of people that care about nature, and finding ways to facilitate them speaking for themselves. So it will become less, me as someone that's worked in the environmental policy and campaigning for 15 years, sort of saying, well, this is what the public thinks. And I think it'll be, hopefully, this is what I'd like to do, spend more time saying, well, I'm not going to tell you what the public think. Let me be more confident in that. Let me introduce you. Let me let the public speak for themselves, because it's a theme I will apparently talk about a lot on this podcast. But, that ability to have that broader range of voices, I think is more impactful. It's more representative, and hopefully will lead to better outcomes. So that, I don't know if that's what everyone will focus on, but certainly from my perspective, the more you can bring shades of green into what are black and white conversations, and the best way to do that, I think, is with a range of voices, and like authentic voices.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier about Parliament. Parliament can be a bit of an intimidating place, which I think is fair. Do you have a view at all on how Parliament may or would consider adapting when it comes to the future?
Doesn't feel like the most progressive of workspaces in that sense. I'm sort of torn, because on the one hand, there are things that I just love about Parliament. It's a sort of ancient democratic institution. It's been doing things a certain way for a really long time, and there's a history and almost aura about it, which I love. But it does speak its own language. It comes with a lot of kind of processes, almost for processes' sake. To just take voting, for example, not being able to do electronic voting. There are mad things. So I have given evidence to a few select committees, to a few bill committees. And to me, it's a bit mad that you invite stakeholders to come to Parliament to give evidence about legislation you're passing. They'll potentially have taken time off work to do it. They'll have taken time out of the day. They've paid money to come to Parliament, and then a division bell will go, and you'll be left sitting in a room halfway through your evidence session while every single MP gets up and votes, and you're there. They'll come back, but it's just a bit mad in a way that you're just sort of sat, like having come to give your expertise, and they can't even just time votes so that they don't occur when they've got like external stakeholders giving quite important evidence. So, I would like to see Parliament modernise a bit, I think, to lean into some of the technology that would help free up time, that they could spend less time on the sort of the mechanics of voting, for example. But I get it in a way, because, that's a process in and of itself, isn't it? Like walking through the lobby means people have to be very open, at least to their colleagues, about how they're voting, and probably are maybe a bit more thoughtful than arguably you might be if you got a quick text on your phone and you just whacked a button. So, but, I think there are things, Parliament could certainly do to modernise and to lean into being a bit more accessible, because at the moment it feels to me like MPs are quite accessible, but it's quite difficult to access or to understand how Parliament itself works and processes and how legislation is being debated. But I guess then just thinking about the mass lobby, one of the anxieties for the parliamentary state as well is, how do you maintain access in a free democracy whilst keeping everyone safe, which is a big challenge. But yeah, I think there are definitely things Parliament could do to lean into, like tech advances, just to sort of slightly speed up and modernise, streamline some processes which might free up busy people's time to do some more policy making, governing, or stakeholder, constituent engagement.
Interesting, and a very good segue at the same time for us to talk about AI.
I set that up, yeah.
Again, full disclosure, we didn't plan this, but it's worked out quite well. What are your thoughts on not just AI in terms of the public affairs profession, but what are your thoughts on how AI is going to impact or have different consequences for MPs, for the parliamentary estate?
There's a lot of chat about, I guess, the sort of dangers of AI. And one of the things that does make me a bit nervous is, and again, it's a theme apparently I'm going to just return to a lot, is that sort of authenticity of voice. And there's an issue, I guess, with AI, like in how things are drafted. I mean, AI, that you end up with sort of AI speak, it can kind of flatten, I worry it might flatten personality a bit, which, I think is really important. Like ultimately Parliament is made up of 650 individuals and, individual constituents are sort of voting for the people that I guess they feel they resonate most with. And so I think AI will help access information. It will help monitoring. It will potentially help people connect with Parliament a lot more because you can translate Parliament speak into more everyday parlance so people can maybe understand it a bit more. From my side, it will probably help translate policy speak into digestible or accessible briefings for MPs, and also it might well help with that ability to tailor messaging to a constituency level. So that's how I hope it will be used. I guess it will free up time so that people, I think about, I used to spend my time franking and stuffing envelopes, and now I email MPs if I'd like them to come to an event, and then we'll phone round. So there are ways that AI will probably help speed up or help with monitoring or help with summarising like long parliamentary debates, which will free up time to do other things. Hopefully it will allow us some more sophisticated data capture and understanding how people feel about issues at a much more kind of geographically discrete level, which I think could be really helpful in terms of tailoring language or tailoring arguments to, secure good outcomes for nature. What I would hate would be is if it did kind of flatten that authenticity of voice or personality, and we got more AI speak in briefings and in the way that things are communicated, because it just takes a bit of the heart out of how parties talk about the policies that they're working on, but also how parliamentarians access and understand constituents really care about. So I'd hate for it to dampen that, I guess, in any way. But any opportunity it has to free up, I guess, more time for people to spend on that engagement, then better, really.
Yeah, because logic would lead me to say that if the public affairs profession gets more time back as a result of AI, and whether it be your MPs or your civil servants get more time back, this is, maybe blue sky thinking here, but maybe it gives you more time to sit around the table and have dialogue and share good practice and hopefully lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, I would hope so. It would free up people's time to actually engage with each other, to hear each other, maybe take some of that adversarialness, is that a word? But yeah, just to take some of that kind of adversarial nature out of how we're engaging with each other and spend a bit more time like listening and understanding and hearing from as diverse a range of voices. If it allows Parliament, if it allows parliamentarians, if it allows campaigning groups to access in particular those groups of people that for whatever reason aren't as engaged at the moment and sort of can bring in more voices, then that, that's only a good thing, really.
Absolutely. In terms of the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years for public affairs professionals, is there anything that stands out as something you think is going to change or going to impact the profession at all?
So I guess a few things. So one is, we are, and this is always the way, but we are in that sort of that big era of some really big policy, in particular like financial issues, which are just dominating everything. And so, certainly for us thinking about the next 5 years, global instability, economic instability, I think will have a big impact on everything, obviously. That, again, is not a massive revelation. But it's, there's less money, there's higher anxiety, people's bandwidth, I think, is shorter to care about things. So I think that's why, we need to spend a bit of time thinking about the language that we use and how we're connecting with people. I think the globalization of politics is interesting. We're already seeing, it's always been so, but we're seeing a bit of kind of creep from America, for example, about how politics works over there. It is a particularly adversarial system over there, and we're seeing a bit of that kind of influence into UK politics. And again, as I said, I think our expectation is we'll see a pretty adversarial 2029 general election. It will be certainly on some of the issues that we work on things that for a long time we've sort of enjoyed and expected consensus on, things like the science around climate change, the need to take action, the kind of pride in the UK being a world leader on net zero, that this is the first time in a very long time, almost ever, I think, that we have not had cross-party consensus on climate. I don't know if we necessarily expect that we'd see cross-party consensus on nature issues either. So, I fully expect over the next 5 years we'll see that, continue to have an impact. And as I say, like people's bandwidth, there's high levels of anxiety at the moment around economics, around global instability, around, just the cost of living. And so I think cut through on our issues will continue to be really, really challenging. And again, it's for us to think about how we talk about and find relevance to people in their everyday lives. And as a result, can get that cut through to politicians to demonstrate that this is something that they should care about, that people really care about. And demonstrate that maybe how things are represented in the media is not actually necessarily borne out in the conversations that people are having in their everyday lives, and how we can better communicate that, I think, so that very adversarial approach and that very kind of black and white representation of the issues is sort of challenged a bit, because we can demonstrate maybe that's just not how it's played out. I mean, it's certainly not my experience with conversations, that I have with people locally about how they care about these issues. So yeah, I think that'll be a challenge for us over the next 4 or 5 years.
Really interesting stuff. I think that the geopolitical landscape, economic instability, I don't think they're going to have positive impacts on the profession and I guess society more generally. And I think the challenges for the profession is pretty clear. So really interesting. Thank you. We will finish off with some slightly, hopefully, more humorous questions. So the first question is, what is your one single non-negotiable advice that you would share with someone who's starting out in public affairs today?
So I think for me, it's sort of authenticity. So, I mean, that sounds like a bit nebulous and like, how would you explain that to someone? Non-negotiable for me is that face-to-face engagement. Is you need to be in Parliament, you need to meet people, and that comes back to that authenticity, because I think, a lot of what we do is based on trust. It's based on relationship, both within Parliament, but kind of across the broad range of stakeholders. And I think you cannot operate effectively and kind of get cut through if you're not present. I tend to find that you cannot do a job, I think, in public affairs if you're not, no matter how good the digital world is, your access to information, the ability to work virtually, it's face-to-face engagement, personality, and that leads to sort of authenticity of voice and credibility. Like, people trust you, they'll access your briefings more, they'll want to read them and they'll come to you because they sort of trust what you're saying. So
very good. Second,
like a job interview.
A little bit, yeah. It's good answer though. Second question: what is your best party conference story?
Golly, that's a good one. I mean, probably I was at party conference during the Liz Truss 49 days, I think, was it 49 days? Yeah. And it's a slightly weird answer, I guess, in a way, but there was something almost hyper about the conference. It was a very weird time, and we were at that point, we'd just launched, I worked for the RSPB at the time, and we'd launched an Attack on Nature, a campaign, because we were particularly unhappy with actions that the Liz Truss government were taking. I mean, I guess partly why it springs to mind is it was an incredibly frenetic conference. It was quite adversarial, but there was this very colloquial and kind of collegiate way of working across the sector. So it was, the entire sector was sort of there. We were really united in what we were working on. It was an incredible, I think Jack read it, weren't you? And it was a really febrile environment, right? You had kind of ex-ministers briefing ex-ministers everywhere you looked. There was it felt like, it is really rare, I think, genuinely, to get a party conference and feel that you're at like the centre of the world. Party conferences we all love, and they're like a place for political like nerds. But my family don't follow conference. Like, no one is like that I know outside of my job is necessarily avidly watching the speeches. But there was just this moment where we just felt like all eyes were on Birmingham and what was happening. And I just found it tiring, but felt we were really well connected with our members and with the public and the mood, and it felt like we were doing something really important. It was quite a weirdly exciting place to be for. It was a weirdly adversarial one, but quite enjoyable. And so that's the one that springs to mind.
I'll never forget that conference either. So yeah, brilliant. The next question is, Who's your favourite Prime Minister?
Gosh, that is a good question. I will fully confess that I am a massive political nerd, but I'm not a member of any political party. So I sort of joke to people that I tend to judge all parties quite harshly and quite unfairly. So I don't know that I would have a favourite because I have quite exacting standards, but there are probably core moments that as a result that spring to mind, I guess, out of it. There were parts of the Boris Johnson government where he put net zero firmly on the world stage, and the UK government at the heart of delivering that. He had high ambitions and really understood the importance of tackling the nature and climate crisis, and put in place in Michael Gove one of the most dynamic kind of innovative sectors of state that we'd had for a while. But I certainly wouldn't put him as my favourite Prime Minister either. There were moments of the David Cameron. I kind of miss the days of Tony Blair and I think David Cameron when things felt a little bit more stable, I guess. But again, I wouldn't say they're my favourite Prime Ministers. So yeah, I genuinely don't think I have one. I think there are just moments where I think it's when big decisions were made in the face of. I think probably the Prime Ministers that I'd sort of have the most respect for are where times were really tough economically or geopolitically, and they made some big decisions off the back of them anyway, like the advent of the NHS or the creation of the national park system. It's those moments that I think I really admire in sort of any politician. It's where they don't hide or shy away from the big decision. When times are tough, that's when they sort of stand up and say, actually, this is when we're going to make them. I feel like we've maybe lost a little bit of that recently. There feels to me like more of a tendency to not make those sort of big decisions because there isn't the money for it, or there's too much going on. So yeah, it's those moments rather than necessarily the entire Prime Minister. That's a massively cop-out answer, I appreciate, but I stand by it.
Just a little bit, but we'll let you have it.
We'll go for it.
The next one, though, I'm going to need a name. There'll be no cop-out on this.
I've worked around politicians for long enough.
Wow,
yeah. On my way out of it.
Who's the best Prime Minister the UK's never had?
Oh, that is a good question. I say one name, and this is a bit of a cop-out answer. I don't think that Gordon Brown, for example, actually was given enough time, probably, and I know there was an election, so the public kind of gave him the time that he had, but I think he got quite a rough time. And I think actually, thinking about some of the big decisions, economically, I think, probably didn't have the time to put in place the stuff that might have led to some better outcomes. It's funny, isn't it? Because I think there are people I think of people like Ken Clarke, who I don't know if you'd have asked me at the time, I'd have agreed with, but sort of hindsight, and in particular seeing where politics goes, I think leads you to sort of respect where people the views that they have or how they've operated in a way that at the time I don't think I necessarily would have appreciated. So yeah, I think someone like him, I guess I might say. But again, that is a really difficult question that you should have prepped me for, and I could have done some more thinking. It's hard to think on my feet. Yeah, I think at the time there are lots of folks that I probably wouldn't have thought would be particularly good at the job, that actually now looking back, you think actually they were pretty good at how they handled conflict. They were pretty conciliatory. They were pretty good at working across the aisle, which are things that I really respect in politics.
How often do you think Gordon Brown thinks about that general election that he could have called in?
I know, right? But again, isn't it? It's your hindsight's, such a wonderful thing in politics or in anything really. Yeah, I do. I wonder if it's sort of
big decision, though.
Yeah, and I always say to people when I'm managing my team, when I get new starters, I say one of the key things about this is probably maybe the non-negotiable that I say working in our industry is that you have to back yourself, in particular in the way that we work. There's often not a very clear path. It's really hard to know what the right thing to do is. Do you mobilise the membership and kind of really go for kind of and pick this issue as the one that you're really going to tackle and kind of raise a lot of awareness and kind of noise about? Do you follow an inside track path? Do you look for a compromise? Do you continue to hold out for the kind of best option? And what I always say to people is at some point you have to make a decision, you have to stick to it and you have to back it. And the worst thing that you can do is make a decision and then continually kick the tires on it and poke it and not commit to it, because often in the work that we do, there is no necessarily clear, really obvious choice to make. But the worst choice of all is not making a choice. So, yeah, I suppose Brown, he made a decision and stuck to it.
You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
Ali, thank you very much. It's been great to have you in. Really, really appreciate it. My thanks to you, and of course my thanks to Ollie Foster, our in-house producer. Perhaps you have a view on the future of public affairs and would like to share it with us, or maybe you've heard some things today that I'd like to get in touch with us on, or even add to the discussion yourself. If you can follow the link in the show's bio, it will direct you to our feedback page for Video Intelligence, which is of course the home of the Havilland and Forefront.